Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Virtual Dev Summit. We are going to be going through the session today, the ArcGIS API for Python, Administering Your GIS. My name is David Vitale. I am a product engineer on the Python API team.
And my name is Bill Major. I am a developer on the ArcGIS Enterprise team.
So first, let's do a brief introduction to the Python API for any of you who don't know what the Python API is. So the Python API is a Python library for spatial analysis, mapping, and GIS. It basically is Python for your Web GIS. It is a powerful, modern Python library that allows you to connect to your Web GIS as well as have some local capabilities. So the Python API has a lot of different customers than different people that we like to service. So the main reason for you attending this talk is you are probably a GIS administrator. So the Python API is great for users, roles, group management, content management. So whether you're a GIS administrator or in the DevOps realm, the Python API is great for you. The Python API is also great for content publishers. So if you want to update content, manage the data on your portal, the Python API can be a great tool for you to use. The Python API is also good if you are a spatial analyst. You can use ArcGIS imagery layers, different location analytics, and different types of spatial analysis to do different GIS workflows. So spatial analysis is also sort of in the broader realm of general data science. So the Python API allows you to do different feature analysis and raster analysis. And finally, the Python API is useful for developers and power users. So that's sort of the general overview of the Python API. And since Bill and I are both big coders, we like to spend as much of our sessions doing live code.
Yep.
So let's just get right to it. Hang on, give me one sec. Sorry about that. There we go. So the first thing we are going to do is use the Python API to connect to our Web GIS. So what I'm using right now is called a Jupyter Notebook. I'm running this locally on my computer. And a Jupyter Notebook is a sort of document and IDE hybrid that allows you to run Python code interactively through a web browser. So normally if you're using Python, you might use PyCharm or different IDEs. The Jupyter Notebooks allows you to run Python code interactively with some rich outputs, different images, equations, even interactive maps at times. So we're going to be using Jupyter Notebooks to run this Python code. So the first line you see here is the most basic import that you will be very used to when you use the Python API. The Python API's library name is ArcGIS. So you run from arcgis.gis, import the GIS class. The GIS class is your main class for connecting to your Web GIS, whether that is an online organization or your portal. So here, for an example, I am going to connect to ArcGIS Online to an anonymous GIS connection. So from here, I can do anything that an anonymous user to ArcGIS Online can do. I can query public layers and do sort of a subset of things because I don't have any credentials that are authenticating me. The main way that you would probably connect to your GIS is through a username or password. So I have an ArcGIS Online organization. I specify the username, and I can type in my password in a secure way. And just like that, I am now connected to my ArcGIS Online organization as my username. So what can I do now that I'm connected to my ArcGIS Online organization? I can query different users. So Rohit Singh is the lead developer for the Python API. He's a part of my organization. So by running gis.users.get, I can get his profile information returned in the variable here, user. I can take that information and get different attributes from it. I can get Rohit's first name and his last name. I can also query multiple users and search for them. So in this case, I've ran gis.users.search, and I'm going to run that cell, and you will see all the different users inside of the organization. From here, since this users variable is just a Python list, you can subset into the list, pick out a different user, and display them. So in this case, I'm displaying my coworker, Angad. So that's how you use the Python API through the GIS class to query different users. You also can use the Python API to query different content. From here, I am going to do gis.users.me. gis.users.me prints out what user you are currently logged in as. So as you see here, you print it out, and this is my profile picture for ArcGIS Online. So when you run gis.users.me.items, you can see all of the different items that I own on ArcGIS Online. I have a different file geodatabase, some feature collections, web maps, CSVs, all the different content on this organization that I own. So as we went through how to go through users and content, you also can search for different groups using the Python API. So here I'm going to do a search for different groups from the user conference, which is what we've used in the past. I can get an item from that list, print that out, and then I can even get the content from that group. So another way you can go through different parts of your content. Related to content, we showed you how to get content off of a user and a group. You also can just search for content in the broader aspect of your GIS. So here I am going to search for all items that have the word Chennai in them. And this is searching through my whole organization. So I have an item owned by this user, an item owned by me, an item owned by a different user, etc. So you can also take different items. You can see who owns them, and if you are the owner of that item, you can actually call updates to the item and update the information. So this is the general overview that you have for the introduction to the GIS class. So now that we are sort of grounded in that, let's go to a bit more of a complicated workflow. So we mentioned in that last notebook how to use different content and how to update content inside your GIS, but we just showed sort of basic things. Let's go a bit more in depth about the specific types of attributes and the different types of functionality that you can update or that you can manage with your WebGIS. So I'm now in a different notebook, and I'm going to import my GIS class. And in this time, instead of ArcGIS Online, I'm going to connect to an ArcGIS Enterprise portal. I am going to then search for items as I did before, and I see I have one item that is related to natural disasters and volcanoes. I can print out that item ID, that item title, and the different tags about it. But if you notice, this item doesn't have a descriptive thumbnail, as you can see. And volcanoes are one of the more photogenic, cool things to look at. So why don't we give an update to this item's thumbnail? So inside of this folder, I have a lovely picture of a volcano that you can see here. So it's in the same directory as my notebook. And what I am going to do is I am going to update this item's thumbnail. So here I have volcano item.update, the thumbnail of that. So once I run this cell, it connects to my GIS, updates the volcano item, and as you can see, my item now contains a lot better of a thumbnail. You also can update different tags inside of the item. So here, as you saw printed out, I have 4 different tags. I'm going to call an item.update on that, add some new tags to it, and now you will see that those new tags of data science have been added to the item. So using sort of different Python functions, you can update items, tags, and other information on an item. You also can get different bits of data off of the item. So we showed before the snippet, the title, and the tag, but you also can download the metadata and the thumbnail of the item. So here I have a different item, ports in the Western US. By calling the download metadata function call, I have now downloaded the metadata of that item. And as you can see here, this metadata item was downloaded into the same directory. You can also download that same thumbnail that we had just updated 1 second ago. And as you see here now, the item has been downloaded. You also can use your GIS to delete different items. So here I have some item, and if I were to call item for deletion .delete, I would be able to delete this item. But oftentimes you don't want to actually delete items because they might be too important for a web map that's out for use in production. So using the Python API, you can call the item delete protection functionality on the item, and you can actually enable delete protection. So here I'm going to have a protected item, and I am going to call .protect enabled equals true. So by calling this function call, as you see, success here is true. If I try to delete this item through the Python API or through the user interface on a browser, an exception will be thrown. And this is an exception that we were expecting, because this title text, as you can see here, says unable to delete item, delete protection was turned on. So this is a good workflow that you can do to protect some of your items from being deleted. And finally, when it comes to content management, you also can add relationships between items. So in this case, I'm going to have one item related to wildfires in California and a different item. I can call fire item 1.add relationship on the second item and specify the relationship type. By running this, I now see true, and now by calling on that initial item what the related services are, I can see a list of all of the related services. So we've successfully established a relationship with that. So you can see here that using the Python API, you really have access to some very powerful tools for managing your content, whether that be updating thumbnails, downloading information from it, migrating different items between portals. You really have a lot of tools at your disposal to manage content in your Web GIS. I'm going to cover one more topic and then hand it over to Bill, and that is server management. So as GIS administrators, a lot of times you need to manage the different servers in your enterprise deployment. So there are services, data stores, logs, and the Python API has native classes for all of these things and native functionality to allow you to interact with that. So just like in the last 3 cells, I am going to import my GIS class, and I am going to connect to my portal. Give it a second to load. I am going to authenticate. And I am now connected to my WebGIS as an administrator. When you're an administrator, you gain access from your GIS to a lot of different properties that non-administrators wouldn't have. Mainly this gis.admin property, which is the admin manager for different administrative functionalities. So I'm going to call gis.admins.servers.list. And from here, I can actually print out all of the different servers that exist on my enterprise deployment. So it looks like I have my main hosting server here, a raster server, and a geoanalytics server here. So I can take these servers, I can take the first one in that, print out the type, and as you see, it is a type server. So we have a native class that instantiates all of this for you. So one very basic sanity test that you might find very useful is on all the servers, you can call gis.admin.servers.validate. And by calling .validate, this basically goes through a check of all of your servers to make sure that they are all okay. So if you get any false output or any sort of, any one of your servers is maybe not behaving the best or is having experienced some outages, you will return a false. But here, as you can see, all of our servers appear to be in good health. So this is a very good way to programmatically check some of the servers that you have running. So I have this server 1 object, which is just one of the servers, in this case, the main hosting server. And I can list all of the services that that server hosts. So by calling server1.services.list, I get a very extensive list of all of the different image services that this server has, as well as all of the other services. I can also print out what folders all these services are hosted in. I can do a list. So then when I called it up here, you notice I had about 30 or so services. It's a very overwhelming list to deal with. I can specify what specific folder to look in, so that way I can manage a bit more of that in my mind. So there is the system folder here, and by calling services.list with an argument of the folder name, I now can see a subset of the different services and the ones that only exist in that service. So you also can check if different services exist inside of different folders. This can be a good check for you to see if a server is in the correct folder or if it's been moved to a different location. So on each of these services, this, as I said before, all of these class items have innate Python classes. The type of this service is of class service. So we have some properties on there to give you a bit more access into your services. So by calling services.properties, you get all the information about the service, what the provider is, what different properties are in it, where the cache directory is, everything you would possibly need to know about a server you can gain programmatically from code, and it's converted to a Python dictionary for you to easily use. You can also start and stop different services. So here I have that service, and if I call stop on that service, give it a second, if I print out the status, it will now say stopped. By calling .start on the service, I am able to restart that service. You also can use the Python API to publish different service definition files to your server. So if you have local SD files or server definition files, you can call publish on them, and it will actually publish the service to your organization. And once you published it, you also can call .delete on a service to delete. So as you can see, the Python API gives you native access to different services on your ArcGIS server. So let's switch a little bit and talk about different data stores. Just like how the server object gives you access to the services, you also can gain access to the data stores. This is a native Python class of data store, and you can print out the network location of all of these data stores, as you can see here. You can register a new data store with the server. So if you want to add a new one from a network location, you can call that programmatically and add that into there. And you can print out the different properties of the different data stores that you have. So just like services, the Python API allows you to add, remove data stores using simple API calls. Finally, let's talk about server logs. So each server object that we have here has a .logs property. And that .logs property shows you all the different logs that exist inside of the server. So I find this personally really useful, that instead of going through a web interface to look at all the logs, I can do this programmatically and sort of link this up with different native Python libraries to visualize the server results in a bit more of an easy to understand way. So by using the pandas library and the matplotlib library, I can actually take different records from these services, and I can take the data from the Python dictionary format that the server returns and convert it into a pandas data frame. So as you see here, I have the service's time, the log messages, all the information you need about it in a pandas data frame. So that I can call all of the different pandas methods on the data frame and do some analysis with the reports. Like, for example, I can query the maximum response times for the last 7 days. So if I take the usage reports that I previously generated and I call a .query, I am able to get the data as a dictionary in memory. I can use NumPy and matplotlib, and I can take that data, convert it into a pandas data frame like I did before, but then also create a matplotlib plot that takes all the different datas and takes all the different logs and graphs their log date with the response time in seconds. So by running that, you can see that over the last 7 days, I can see the maximum response time. So I see it's been roughly stable at around the same time, but there was a little bit of a spike on this one day. So maybe that would be useful information for you as a GIS administrator to look into what was going on that day and see if there's anything that you would update to make those response times a little shorter. So I went through all the parts that I was going to go through with the sort of introduction to the Python API and using it for basic GIS administrative tasks. And I'm now going to hand it over to Bill, who is going to talk through some of the different samples and notebooks that we have for even more complex GIS administrative workflows. So go ahead, Bill.
Thank you, David. So like David said, David showed you a lot of good stuff, some very specific things that you can use to admin your enterprise or your portal, whether it be ArcGIS Enterprise or online in some situations. What I'm going to do is spend a little bit of time talking about taking a higher level look at some workflows and how you can automate some of these tasks as an administrator. So the first thing I want to highlight is with Notebook Server, when you have a Notebook Server installed and configured with your ArcGIS Enterprise, one of the things is that there is a group called Esri sample notebooks. And in here is a lot of great samples that David and the team has spent quite a bit of time on pulling together that we ship with Portal, ranging from administrative workflows to content management to analysis. And what we're going to do today is focus on some of the administrative notebooks that we ship that you can get up and set up and get running for yourself. All right, so the first thing I'm going to walk through is the manage inactive users. This is a question I think a lot of administrators have is, hey, how do I manage the users in my ArcGIS Enterprise? How do I find out who's not logging in, or old users, or maybe how do I find users that have too much content, or a variety of different scenarios. And this is just one example of specifically how can you find all the users that are inactive, that maybe haven't logged in within a certain period of time, and then even a longer period of time, if they don't log in, you can start disabling their accounts. All right, so I'm not going to spend a lot of detail stepping through these things specifically, but the first thing we do is we get some libraries set up. We make a connection to our portal using GIS Home, like David talked about. I've commented out some code here, but the samples show you how to create a secrets file. So naturally, I don't want to show you specific passwords or something like that. So in this particular case, I've taken the time to run some code that was there. I've commented it out now. But basically, it creates a new item in my content that has a secrets in it. And that secret for me is a password that I'm using to send some email that we'll see here in a moment. So you can set that up. We got good, the notebooks themselves document clearly how you can set up a secret, okay? So that's what this secret here is all about. I then have some different functions on here, retrieving that secret and getting a piece of information out of it. I got some information set up on how I would send some Gmail, which we'll look at in a little bit. So the next thing is now, how do we find inactive users, all right? So we're gonna look for two different time frames. One, for someone that hasn't logged in for the past 15 days, that may be a little too quick for your organization. I'm using a portal that isn't used by many people. So I actually moved that down to 15 days just so I can have a couple examples to show you today. And then also, if you want to start disabling counts, then what is that time frame? In this case, we say 60 days. Again, that's totally up to you. I then have some other variables that where, hey, when we, who to email in certain situations. I have some methods that talk about getting the date of last login and comparing it, number of days. So these are just all helper functions that the main body will use here in just a moment. We actually send an email not only to me, the administrator, of, hey, here's all the people that are inactive or whatever, but we also send emails to individual users saying, hey, you haven't logged into this portal for a certain amount of time. If you don't do that, then you need to either log in, or we may actually start deleting accounts at some point. And this goes to the email that is registered, the user used to create the account, by the way. Then there's a function to disable users, to send emails to let them know that their account's going to be disabled. Some other helper functions where we kind of collect the information. We'll write it to disk just so we have it handy. What does the email look like we're going to run? So these are all just functions that then ultimately the main function here will use. So the function will actually go through, get all the users in the organization, start to compare their days of logins. How long ago has it been? Do they fall within the notify range, or do they, notify fall within the beyond the disabled range, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to go ahead and actually quickly now just, I guess I should have been running this. Wow, look at that. I already have a, what happened, David? I didn't do too well. Let me start over. Run. Got a secret. Active days. So I'm just running, these are all my helper functions I'm setting up. Now write some stuff. These are still helper functions. There's my main. Now I'm going to call main. Okay, there we go. So this is now going through all the users and checking for anyone that hasn't logged in, at certain time frames. Now we can keep going for a moment, so we can just look at that same information in a pandas data frames just so it's easy to visualize, okay? So that's cool. So we had 2 users that were in the, hey, I'm gonna notify you that you haven't logged in within 15 days, but no one in this case particularly fell in the disabling range, all right? So what happened as a result of this? Well, you might have noticed that it feels like some emails would have been sent. And sure enough, you can see here that I've just received an email in my Esri email that says, hey, manage inactive users notebook ran, and here's a link to the item that contains those users. And oh, by the way, here are those users. And in this case, there are no disabled users. So that's a really cool way that we're taking advantage of some SNTP server, in this case, Google, Gmail. Up here, you would have to maybe get with your organization if you wanted to use your own email account or something like that. So this ran, it found users, it compared like when their last logins were, it sent emails to them as well individually, as well as sending me an email as administrator saying, hey, this notebook ran, here's the users we notified based on their emails, here's a link to the CSV that I just created, and in this particular case, no users were disabled. So this is a really useful sample for you to, you could perhaps use it as is, or take it and adapt it to your organization needs. Maybe you have a list of users that no longer work at your organization, so you may either want to disable those users. You may want to find those users and move their content to another user so you can delete their account. You just start thinking about those types of things of how you want to best use the Python API and some automation techniques like this to manage your users. David, is that good? Got anything to add there?
No, that's great. Yeah, so the way the email was sent out is it connected to an SMTP server using the Python SMTP library. So if you have any SMTP server set up for any email client, the Python library SMTP lib should be able to connect to that server.
Yep.
You might need to tinker with the security settings, but it's possible.
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and talk about that. We got some time. Gmail, we had a lot of problems getting it to work. Gmail really takes security seriously. So we actually had to enable 2-factor authentication in order to create an app password, and that password is being used to send an email. So there's a lot of there's a lot of websites that kind of detail what you need to do to get that working for you. All right, David went through this, but I just want to highlight the fact that we have a sample that can do this as well. This is a sample that will validate all of your federated servers. So some users may want to maybe once a day say, hey, let me go federate all of my federated servers, just to make sure they're validating well, they're passing their health checks, and there aren't any problems, and perhaps use this as a way to discover problems in advance before users start having problems. So again, I'm going to get my secrets file, which I've already created for myself. Now I'm going to get the admin object, which David talked about. I'm going to get all of the federated servers associated with my site. All right, so I get those servers, just prints out some basic information. I then, do some more things here. Now I'm going to do where basically like in Portal on my organization, when it validates servers, we're going to basically do that same thing here. All right, so it goes out and validates all the servers at this point. In this case, there's just 2 to make sure that they validate successfully. All right, now sometimes this could take a few seconds to run depending on how many sites you have. And then what we're going to do is just retrieve that information, throw it into a pandas data frame just so we can visualize it. We see that one actually returned a success with warnings, which is okay. And then the next thing we do is, again, in this case, we would send an email, right? So maybe this is something that you set up automatically to run once a day or once every few hours. And at the end, it sends an email just to let you know, hey, we ran the validation, and here's what validated and didn't validate, okay? And again, I should have received, sometimes it takes a little bit for it to come through. Oh, there we go. Receive a new email message that talks about, hey, here's the servers and their validations, output, just to let you know, this was the warning that one of them doesn't have a registered data store, which our notebook server, of course, does not. All right, so really, really convenient ways to start automating to get notified about it. Now, some of you may have asked what this crazy email is here, and I meant to take that out, so my apologies, but I'm going to come to that towards the end of this, because that's a really cool thing. So what have we talked about? Managing your users, validating your sites. You can also run through and validate all of your data stores. Again, David showed you that, but we have a good sample where you can quickly run through this as well. So not to repeat a lot on this front. Again, it goes through, and at the end of the day, guess what? It sends me another email. So you kind of see a theme going here a little bit. And sorry about some of these other Esri emails going on, but let's wait for an email to come in just so that I'm not have a whole lot of smoke and mirrors. So yeah, so I'm receiving emails each time these notebooks run at the end of status of things and links that you can then click on to go back into your portal to retrieve certain information. All right, what's next? So this is one that I would say is near and dear to David's heart a little bit, because he gave something, went over some things related to this in last year's Dev Summit Plenary. And this relates to maybe you as an admin, or maybe you as a GI, as a portal administrator, not necessarily a sysadmin or an IT admin. You want to ensure integrity of items being created, that they have proper metadata, whether it be descriptions, thumbnails, number of tags, and different things like that. So this is a notebook that just kind of looks at this is a sample again. I'm just using some of our samples that looks at a few, I think 3 of those things, and basically finds any items that don't meet your metadata standards or your item standards that users may be adding. All right, so let's see, we're just going to run through this again. So in this case, all we're looking at is, hey, does it have a description? Does it have a custom thumbnail besides the default world view or whatever it is? And does it have a snippet? All right, so those are the 3 things that we're looking at for this particular example. So just getting some helper functions here. So now it's going to start looping through all the users and getting all the content in the portal so that it can start analyzing this, all right? So we're just printing out some information as it loops through users. And we're just printing out, how many items are owned by the different users in this case. So again, this portal, this enterprise portal does not have a lot of users, really doesn't have a lot of items, all right? So then we look at our pandas, at a dictionary of the information that it collected of all the items. And then you can see like this true, false, false. These are some of the Boolean variables of whether it met certain metadata standards or not, okay? So then we just got some other things here. We can display this information in a pandas data frame. So for the name of the item, did it have a description? Did it have a thumbnail? Excuse me. What was its item ID? For some things like a feature service, it may have the URL, for example. So at the end of the day, what we do is, we dump all that into a CSV file and add it as a new item. So perhaps you run this once a day, for example, it adds a new item, and then you may want to open this item and look at it and make some determination of, hey, how many items have been added over the past day that don't have proper metadata. Of course, just to continue my trend here a little bit, I'm going to send myself an email, just me personally. You could, kind of, break this up. So you send each individual user, hey, you have an item that doesn't have proper metadata standards. You need to fix it, or maybe we delete the item, or, try to enforce, something bad will happen if they don't make some adjustments. And of course, it's just dumping it out as well to the screen. Of course, we come over here and check out our email. I can see that, based on, my notebook, how I sent this guy, I basically said, hey, what's the length of the number of items? And that's the subject of my email. And these are links to, each item that you could open yourself if you wanted to. some of you may be wondering, what's this URL defense? This is something that Esri uses that will run things through a sort of a security proxy so that bad URLs don't come in and do bad things to our systems. All right, so that's cool. Not to keep driving home the sample situation, but let's go through one more. Like, I think a lot of the questions we get at conferences and stuff is about how do I manage my users. I think this validate metadata one is important. It may not be something you think about often, but you want to make sure that items have good tags, and you don't have a lot of them that say test. I'm very guilty of adding a lot of test or delete me tags, so that when users do actually need to search and find items, then the metadata on your items is rich, and it's more likely that they'll find the information that they're looking for. So this is also a very popular one.
This one's my favorite.
I've had to modify it a little bit, but you may need to modify it in different things. But this is very, very important, because over time, it's very, very likely that a lot of URLs that are registered with your portal, either as external service layers or layers that you add to web maps or things like that, either are unavailable, have been deleted. Maybe HTTP sites change to HTTPS only, so therefore the HTTP URL doesn't work anymore. So this is a really nice sample that loops through web maps and looks at URLs of layers in web maps and determines if the endpoints are still reachable or not. Okay. Now, there may be some false positives in this when you're running through things in a very heavily populated portal. So, you need to start, modifying it and really figuring out exactly how to tweak it to meet your needs. But let's just step through this a little bit. David, please correct me if I don't do it justice here. So I'm gonna get my secrets. I'm gonna set up my email. I'm gonna check all items. I'm gonna find all items in my portal. Now, if you have a very large portal, you may not want to set this to true. You may want to focus on groups at a time or something like that, because if you have a very large portal and perhaps 1 million web maps or who knows how many, then this could take a very long time to run, is my point. Who am I going to email? I'm going to email myself. Now I got some helper functions basically saying, is the URL reachable or not? This is where I tweaked it just a tiny bit. Basically, I'll come back to this in a moment. Is the URL reachable? So for each web map, then this one basically loops through all the layers in a web map and basically calls, hey, is each one of these URLs reachable or not? If not, return false or raise an exception. This assembles a cool little email. So we just keep going here. And then our main function basically will run through all of the web app items. Ooh.
You forgot to run some cells in the top.
Did I?
You skipped over them, yeah.
All right. Not very good at my scrolling and running at the same time. My mistake. These should be set up to run automatically once you get things set up the way you want them to be. So as you can see, I found one web map that it has deemed to be unreachable. Interesting. Okay, so guess what? Did I send myself an email? Yep. So you can see in here that for this particular web map, one layer was reachable, which was the base map, and then another one called watersheds was not reachable. So I think if I click on this item, it should take me to that web map, which I could then open. It's like, well, let's try to figure out why this was not reachable. And when I try to load this web map with that layer, indeed. Well, so naturally I set this up so I could demo this. This was a layer to a hosted feature service that I had since deleted, but I didn't change the web map. So the web map still thinks this layer is in there, but in fact, that URL no longer exists. So here's a case of where you could set up a sample that you run once a day or maybe once a week, where you're trying to keep your portal clean and making sure that users have the best experience possible. So this is a great sample. Like I said, you may want to extend this beyond web maps, extend it to feature services or WMS, anything that has
Web
a URL,
scenes,
web
web apps.
scenes, anything that has a URL, you could take this and expand it to meet your needs. All right, so I'm gonna stop there for a moment. I've shown you, I've really stressed shown the how you can send emails. Of course, a lot of us are like, wow, just more emails to fill up your inbox. So what are some other things you can do besides notifying people, besides sending them emails? Because naturally, if you've seen my screen, you see that I got 10,000 emails in my inbox, which is probably a very poor thing. So one of the things that you can also do, or actually, you know what? I'm going to come back to that topic. I'm going to switch gears for a moment. All right, I'm jumping ahead of myself. So we have these notebooks, right? They all run on their own. So once I have them set up, and I ran the cells correctly, they will all run through automatically, right? There's nothing asking me for a password, and as long as everything is set up correctly, they should run automatically. So one of the new things we introduced at, and I'm sorry I don't have a window open for this, is a new API that's called Execute Notebook. Now I'm going to the admin API of Notebook Server just to show you the fact that this thing called Execute Notebook exists. What Execute Notebook does for you is it automatically runs a notebook associated with an item headless, meaning that you don't have to open it and say run all cells or anything like this. This will automatically, it's an API that you can call that will run any notebook as long as it can be run automatically with no user interaction whenever you want to. All right. So this is really great. The other cool thing about this is we can inject parameters with this call that end up getting injected into the notebook themselves as variables that then you could then program against in your notebook. All right, so this is part of the story. So this is an admin API, but now how do you incorporate this? Well, this is where another cool thing with the Python API, where we've also at the latest release embedded this into this API, into the Python, too many APIs. We've coded this into the Python API so you can call it, okay? So let's take a look at this script just briefly. So I'm creating a GIS object, and in this case, I'm using a save profile that will connect back to the same portal we were just looking at. Using the admin manager, I get a handle to the notebook server that's registered. And then what I do here is I have the names of the 5 notebooks I just showed you. What I'm going to do is for each one of these in this list, I search and find it, and then I called execute notebook. I pass it that item. I basically say, hey, update save the resulting notebook back to the item when it's done. And then I'm going to inject some parameters. In this case, just a variable called A and just a random integer. All right. And then what I do here is then I wait for this notebook. I go into a loop and I wait for that job to finish before I move on and execute the next one. So I'm going to go ahead and run this guy now. And as you can see, I'm going to run 5 notebooks, and I have some print messages here. So we'll get there. Come on, wireless. What's happening here? An exception has occurred? Man, I'm having a terrible time today with my... let's just run it, see what happens. Of course, always works great until it's actual demo time.
The internet appears to be down on my computer.
Oh,
I
super.
don't know if that's related.
So, I'm assuming that air recording is still working.
It says connection error.
Is this? Okay, so the internet is down. That's a bummer.
Yeah, it is.
All right, well, we'll wait for this, but trust me in that it should work. And what I wanted to show you in this is not only will each one of those notebooks run successfully, it sends me an email because that email functionality is in each notebook. But another thing I've done is I've actually configured Microsoft Flow. So I'm basically kind of thinking of it as I'm making this call to Microsoft Flow like almost like a webhook. I'm making my own webhook, so to speak, okay? So what is Microsoft Flow? Microsoft Flow allows you to basically receive an HTTP request. You do something like parse the JSON of it. In this case, it parses the body that I'm sending. So I'm sending like the name of the notebook and whether it was successful or not. Just some parameters you can put in the body. And then as a result of that parsing of that JSON, I'm then actually writing a message to Teams. Now, this could be Slack, but in this case, Esri, we're big users of Microsoft Teams. So instead of sending a whole lot of emails, we could actually have team notifications. So I don't know if the internet's back up. Let me see. Refresh this. Oh, we got some internet. So I'm gonna go ahead and try to run this again just to save the demo day here. No internet makes it hard sometimes. Okay. So like I said, I got 5 notebooks I'm gonna loop through. Each one, by the time it spins up a container, fully executes, and then, does its thing, it could take, a couple minutes to run through all of these. But this is running each notebook. I don't have to have it open. I could have closed all these notebooks. This is fully running it, headless with no user interaction at all. As a result of this, I should be getting emails, as you can see, based on my notebook. But more importantly, what we should be getting are these notifications here. So I have a Teams notification set up. So you can see that I'm writing, like as each notebook successfully executes, it's posting a message to my Teams channel. This could be a Slack channel, which I know a lot of people use as well. So that's a really cool integration functionality that really can automate things as well as provide different means of communication of the completion of these various things.
I'll add one small thing there. So Zapier and IFTTT are different services that allow you to connect to, as Bill said, Teams and Slack, but it also allows you to do things like sending push notifications to phones or updating GitHub issues, for example. So we're just connecting to that service, and that service is doing the communication. So they support a lot of different types of different forms of communication.
Right. So just to look at our Python script, it fully executed. The cool thing about this is I could now take this Python script, which is calling my portal and executing notebooks automatically, and set this up on a task scheduler or use a cron job to run it automatically. So you start to have this really, this sense of administrative automation using the Python API, use an execute notebook, creating your notebooks so they can be run automatically with no user interaction. So this is really, really a powerful workflow that we're very excited about. Now the last thing I wanted to show is, let's take this a step further. At 10.8.1, the natural, I talked about, hey, you could set this up with task scheduler or cron job. But if you watched any of our plenary demo videos, you'll also know that we're working on the ability to schedule notebooks within Portal. So that same scheduling aspect we're bringing into the enterprise portal and online interfaces. So for a notebook, you will be able to create a task for it. A task is basically a schedule. So I want to run a notebook on a certain schedule with certain parameters every so often. Maybe it's once a day, once for run it for 100 times or some things like that. So this is also very exciting capability we're working on for 10.8.1. More to come in this area at the user conference this summer, hopefully. But do know that the evolution of the execute notebook and automation, we're bringing the scheduling story to that. So now we have a really nice intelligent automation experience that's coming this summer. So David, I guess, I don't know if you have, I can turn it back to you
Yep.
just for a few closing slides and we'll wrap up.
That's really, yeah, that's all that we had. So we'd like to thank you for attending our virtual session. Just some useful links for you. The Python API is accessible at developers.arcgis.com/Python. That's our landing page that shows you introductions on how to install the Python API, other guides and samples and code snippets that you can use. We also manage a public GitHub repository that contains a lot of those samples, and we post a lot of the conference notebooks that we use to that GitHub repository in the conferences resources branch. So look out for this slideshow and a few of the notebooks that we showed today in that branch. And then finally, to learn more about ArcGIS Notebook Server, you can go to enterprise.arcgis.com/en/notebook, or just Google ArcGIS Notebook Server.
Yep.
So, yep, that's all that I have. So thank you guys very much.
Thank y'all, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yep, take care.